Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India News Hour, India's voice to the world. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. Coming up in the next hour. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi speaks with Russian President Vladimir Putin, discusses bilateral ties and regional conflict, also speaks with Ukrainian President Zelensky. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken reaches Saudi Arabia on his sixth visit to West Asia to push for a Gaza ceasefire deal and release of hostages. Unrest in South Sudan continues. New flare-up of local violence kills 15. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi's state visit to Bhutan has been postponed due to ongoing inclement weather conditions over Paro Airport in Bhutan. It has been mutually decided to postpone the state visit of Indian Prime Minister to Bhutan. This was scheduled for 21st and 22nd of March. New dates are being worked out by the two sides through diplomatic channels. Earlier, Prime Minister was to visit Bhutan on 21st and 22nd of March. Moving on, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi attended the nation's largest and first of its kind startup event called Startup Mahakumbh in the national capital, New Delhi. On Wednesday, Prime Minister said India's startup ecosystem is flourishing at an unprecedented pace. DD India's Taposh Bhattacharya gets us more.
Startup Mahakumbh 2024, where innovation meets opportunity and entrepreneurship thrives. In this journey of discovery, Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed the entrepreneurs and stakeholders, heralding India's remarkable strides in the world of startups. PM hailed India's startup journey.
आज जब देश 2047 के विकसित भारत के रोड मैप पर काम कर रहा है, अब हम भारत में इनोवेशन और स्टार्टअप कल्चर का ट्रेंड लगातार बढ़ता हुआ देख रहे हैं.
The Startup Mahakumbh, held at Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi, has ignited a fire of creativity and collaboration with its resounding theme of Bharat Innovates. PM Modi said that India has more than 1.25 lakh startups, 110 unicorns.
देश ने स्टार्टअप इंडिया अभियान के तहत इनोवेटिव आइडियाज को एक प्लेटफॉर्म दिया, उनको फंडिंग के सोर्स से कनेक्ट किया. हमारा स्टार्टअप इकोसिस्टम सिर्फ बड़े मेट्रो शहर तक सीमित नहीं है. ये देश के 600 से अधिक जिलों तक पहुंच चुका है. इसका मतलब है ये एक सामाजिक कल्चर बन गया है.
From deep tech to agri-tech, biotech to medtech, AI to gaming, the confluence of stakeholders and experts promises to propel emerging sectors to new heights. PM Modi also stressed on the 1 lakh crore fund announced for the research and innovation in interim budget that will help sunrise sectors. India's startup ecosystem not limited to metro cities. It has now become a social culture. With over 2,000 startups, 1,000 plus investors and 100 plus unicorns, the Startup Mahakumbh is India's largest and first of its kind startup extravaganza.
The Startup Mahakumbh is designed to foster innovation and entrepreneurship across India, focusing on the government's agenda to boost emerging sectors such as deep tech, agri-tech, biotech, medtech and AI. The integration of an aspirational India with the startup sector will propel India's economy during the Amrit Kal and make India a developed nation by 2047. With camera person Vicky, this is Taposh Bhattacharya for DD India from Delhi.
India has slammed the UFC model for UN Security Council reform, citing lack of representation from Africa and the Global South and no change in the Council's permanent membership. UFC, also known as Coffee Club, opposes the expansion of permanent seats at the UNSC. India's latest stance on UNSC reform was articulated by the permanent representative to the UN, Ruchira Kamboj, on Tuesday, who demolished the UFC model, saying that it will not empower Africa or any other nation.
India on Tuesday slammed the Uniting for Consensus UFC model on the United Nations Security Council UNSC reforms, citing that it won't empower Africa or the Global South nations or change permanent seat membership, highlighting China's conflict of interest in supporting no alteration in permanent membership. India's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ruchira Kamboj, demolished the UFC model on non-permanent membership and other points.
We have the models out for all member states to see. To say, let us agree before we start negotiations is like giving every member country a veto. And while vetoes may be used in the United Nations Security Council, we don't operate on the basis of vetoes in the United Nations General Assembly. Thus, when asking for an impossible consensus preceding text-based negotiations, isn't the UFC just vetoing the whole process and suggesting a my way or the highway approach?
India has been a vocal proponent of reforming the UNSC to reflect the contemporary geopolitical landscape. Towards this objective, India is actively engaged in the ongoing intergovernmental negotiations with G4 nations that includes India, Brazil, Germany and Japan, and the L69 group, the cross-regional grouping of developing countries of Asia, Africa and Latin America. India was elected as a non-permanent member of the UNSC for the 8th time for the term 2021-2022, with an overwhelming majority, 184 out of 193 votes, during the elections held in June 2020 in New York. The UFC, which comprises 12 countries and 2 observers, including a P5 nation, stands against the idea advocated by a majority of the UN member states, which is an expansion in the permanent and non-permanent categories of an expanded Security Council. The UFC's opposition against new permanent seats would make the Council less accountable, less representative, less democratic and effective.
The Security Council has been able to deliver on peace and security in the contemporary world with both feet, if I may say so, firmly fixed in the past, is a larger question that the member states need to collectively ponder upon. And for this, an expansion of the Council in both categories of membership is absolutely essential. This is the only way to bring the Council's composition and decision-making dynamics in line with contemporary geopolitical realities.
The process of reforming the UNSC would require amendments to Article 108 of the UN Charter. Amendments are adopted by a voice of 2/3 of the members of the General Assembly and ratified in accordance with their respective constitutional processes. For reforms in the UNSC, India has presented a detailed model on behalf of the G4 nations that includes new permanent members elected democratically by the General Assembly and displays flexibility on the veto issue. The proposals elicited strong support for wider UN members. The proposal includes an increase in the membership from the current 15 to 25 to 26 by adding 6 permanent and 4 or 5 non-permanent members. Among the 6 new permanent members, 2 each are proposed to be from African states and Asia-Pacific states, 1 from Latin American and Caribbean states, and 1 from Western European and other states. India highlighted that it is important to note that the G4 model does not specify which member states will occupy the new permanent seats, but stressed that the Council's inability to address critical conflicts and maintain international peace and security underscores the urgent need for reform.
South Korea is currently hosting the third Summit for Democracy, a key conclave spearheaded by United States President Joe Biden. The summit is focused on addressing the pressing issues of democratic backsliding and erosion of rights and freedoms worldwide. On Wednesday, India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar delivered the country's national statement at the summit virtually. DD India's Mihir Maikuri gets us more.
Amidst global challenges to democracy, South Korea is taking a leading role in the fight for democratic renewal by hosting the third Summit for Democracy conference initiated by US President Joe Biden. South Korea aims to address the threats of democratic backsliding and the erosion of rights and freedoms. On Wednesday, India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar delivered the country's national statement at the Summit for Democracy virtually. Indian Minister Jaishankar highlighted that under the Indian Constitution, every citizen, regardless of their background, enjoys equal rights and opportunities.
The Indian Constitution, a beacon of pluralism and inclusivity, stands as a testament to the confidence of the Founding Fathers to create a nation where every citizen, regardless of the background, enjoys equal rights and opportunities. The spirit of debate, discourse and consensus building that pervaded our historical past continues to breathe life into our democratic institutions.
The External Affairs Minister also highlighted other key features of India's democracy, including the importance of women's participation in the country's electoral process.
By reserving seats for women in local bodies, we today have 1.4 million women, or the largest cohort of elected women representatives at the grassroots level in any part of the world. Our recent decision to extend 33% reservation for women in both parliament and state legislatures recognizes the fundamental principle that women's voices are indispensable in shaping the nation's destiny.
This week, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, US top diplomat Antony Blinken and other foreign officials called for measures to counter digital threats to freedom at the summit.
As authoritarian and repressive regimes deploy technologies to undermine democracy and human rights, we need to ensure that technology sustains and supports democratic values and norms.
The summit, established in 2021, focused its agenda this year on digital threats to democracy, including misinformation, artificial intelligence, and deepfakes. The event also witnessed escalating tensions between China and South Korea due to Seoul's decision to invite Taiwan's digital minister, Audrey Tang, to address a conference. The event's backdrop is crucial. North Korea fired short-range ballistic missiles into the sea, its first such launch in 2 months, and Russian President Putin claimed victory in a record post-Soviet landslide in a presidential election. These developments add significance to the conference, where democratic countries discuss the future of democracy in light of these challenges. Mihir Maikuri reporting for DD India.
We're heading for a short break. Still to come on DD India News Hour. Notification for the first phase of Lok Sabha elections in India issued. Russian President Vladimir Putin vows to ensure security of the border regions. Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar announced his resignation.
Voice of a rising aspirational world. Stories of challenges, struggles and accomplishment. A world battling conflict, hunger and poverty. Embracing growth, development, science and technology. A voice of progress, a voice of unity. Watch Voice of the Global South with me, Akshay Dongre, only on DD India.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. Let's get you the latest on what's happening in India's run-up to the world's largest democratic elections. Notification for the first phase of Lok Sabha polls scheduled for 19th of next month, this April, has finally been issued by Election Commission. The hustle-bustle of campaigning has intensified across the country. The next report brings us what happened today as far as political campaigning is concerned, with both ruling and opposition parties leaving no stone unturned to vote voters.
With the issuance of the notification for the first phase of Lok Sabha polls, the hustle and bustle of poll campaigning has peaked up across the country. The Central Parliamentary Board of the Lok Jan Shakti Party, Ram Vilas, met and decided to field Chirag Paswan from the Hajipur seat of Bihar. This seat is considered a traditional bastion of his father, Ram Vilas Paswan. While as part of the changing political landscape, Jan Adhikar Party chief Pappu Yadav has merged his party with the Congress and he himself joined the Congress.
ये एक सहमति जरूर हुई है और आज भी केंद्रीय संसदीय बोर्ड में भी इस बात को लेकर औपचारिक मुहर लगा दी गई है। इतना अब तय है कि हाजीपुर, जो मेरे नेता मेरे पिता आदरणीय रामविलास पासवान जी की कर्मभूमि रही है, वहां से एनडीए के प्रत्याशी के रूप में लोक जनशक्ति पार्टी रामविलास के उम्मीदवार मैं खुद स्वयं होऊंगा।
हम लोग मिलकर 24 भी जीतेंगे और 25 तो जीतेंगे ही जीतेंगे। इसी उम्मीद के साथ आज हम कांग्रेस नेतृत्व को खास तौर पे अपने राष्ट्रीय अध्यक्ष, अपने बहन प्रियंका जी, जिन्होंने बहुत मजबूती के साथ हमें हिम्मत दी और उन्होंने कहा कि जस्ट यू ज्वाइन, ये मेरे लिए इससे बड़ी बात कुछ नहीं हो सकती थी।
Meanwhile, former Chief Minister of Karnataka, Basavaraj Bommai, claimed that Congress is on the verge of split. He said that the moment PM Modi will again take oath after a resounding victory in the polls, there is every possibility of Congress being divided and split.
I believe that the moment Narendra Modi ji, our Honorable Prime Minister, will take a oath, after that few months, Congress are most likely to be divided.
2 days after quitting from the post of Telangana Governor and Puducherry Lieutenant Governor, Tamilisai Soundararajan rejoined BJP on Wednesday. She was appointed as Telangana Governor in 2019. After this, she was given additional charge of the Lieutenant Governor of Puducherry in February 2021. In Tamil Nadu, the AIA-DMK party released its first list of 16 candidates. In the AIA-DMK alliance, the DMDK is contesting on 5 seats, the SDPI on 1 seat and the Puthiya Tamilagam on 1 seat. While Tamil Nadu's ruling DMK party released its manifesto on Wednesday, it promised not to implement the Citizenship Amendment Act or Uniform Civil Code and to provide subsidies for LPG and petroleum products. The party also announced its first list of 16 candidates for the general election. Meanwhile, Apna Dal Kameravadi, a party of the opposition alliance in Uttar Pradesh, has announced its list of candidates for the forthcoming Lok Sabha polls. The Apna Dal K has decided to fight the Lok Sabha polls on 3 seats of Uttar Pradesh. Bureau Report, DD India.
Let's take a look at India's history of elections, which have evolved over the years, from using paper ballots to electronic voting machines, EVMs.
After independence till 1952, India was run by an interim legislature known as the Indian Constituent Assembly. The Election Commission is an independent constitutional authority brought into force from November 26, 1949, whereas most of its other provisions were made effective from January 26, 1950, when the Constitution of India became effective. The first ever elections were held on the basis of universal adult franchise, which is associated with Article 326 of the Indian Constitution. It states that all citizens, regardless of their caste, education, religion, gender, color, race and economic conditions, are free to vote, and anyone over the age of 21 years old could cast their franchise. The voting age in India was reduced to 18 years.
We now bring you the message of Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the Democracy Summit in Seoul.
Excellencies, Namaskar. I thank President Yoon Suk Yeol for continuing this initiative. Summit for Democracy has emerged as an important platform where democracies share experiences and learn from each other. Excellencies, in a few weeks from now, the world will witness the largest festival of democracy in India. With around 1 billion voters expected to vote, this will be the largest electoral exercise in the history of mankind. The people of India will once again affirm their faith in democracy. India has an ancient and unbroken culture of democracy. It has been the lifeblood of Indian civilization. Consensus building, open dialogue, and free discussion have resonated throughout India's history. That is why my fellow citizens consider India to be the mother of democracy. Excellencies, over the last decade, India has moved forward with the mantra of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas, Sabka Prayas. That is, collective efforts for inclusive growth. Reaching out to all sections of society, particularly the poor, women, youth, and farmers, has been our top priority in the true spirit of inclusivity. We have transitioned to a performance-based governance where shortages, corruption, and discrimination have been replaced by transparency, accountability, and opportunity. In these efforts, technology has played a crucial role as a great enabler. India's rapid progress in digital public infrastructure have revolutionized public service delivery and enhanced financial inclusion. Riding on the power of youth and technology, India has rapidly developed into the world's third largest startup ecosystem. Our 1.4 million elected women representatives at the grassroots level are our agents of change for women-led development. Excellencies, today, India is not only fulfilling the aspirations of its 1.4 billion people, but it also providing hope to the world that democracy delivers and democracy empowers. When the Indian Parliament passed a law to ensure minimum 1/3 representation for women legislators, it gave hope to women across the democratic world. When India lifted 250 million people out of poverty, in the last 10 years. It reinforced global faith in democracy as an agent of positive change. When India delivered COVID medicines and vaccines to more than 150 countries, it reflected the healing power of democracy. When India successfully landed Chandrayaan on the moon, it was not just a proud moment for India, it was a triumph of democracy as well. When India amplified the voice of the Global South during its G20 presidency, it showed the importance of consultative decision-making in international politics. Now, as India is on track to become the world's third largest economy, it gives hope to millions of people around the world for a brighter future. As India resolved to become a developed nation by 2047, it shows that democracy can aspire, inspire, and achieve. Excellencies, in the era of turmoil and transitions, democracy faces many challenges. This requires us to work together. Democratic countries should lead the efforts in making international systems and institutions more inclusive, democratized, participative, and fair. Only through such shared efforts will we be able to fulfill the aspiration of our people. And we will also lay the foundation of a secure, stable, and prosperous future for the generations to come. India stands ready to share its experience with all fellow democracies in this pursuit. Thank you.
That was Prime Minister Narendra Modi's address at the Summit for Democracy taking place in Seoul, South Korea. Prime Minister, in his address, spoke about the manner in which India stands as a shining example and a beacon of hope as far as democracy in the world is concerned. He gave examples of the elections that are going to take place in India, the world's largest elections with over 1 billion people eligible to vote. And Prime Minister also spoke about the manner in which India has shown the manner in which democracy can work, deliver and empower. Those were some of the highlights of what Prime Minister said in this conference that is taking place in Seoul, South Korea. Prime Minister joined in virtually. Moving on, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Russian President Vladimir Putin held a telephonic conversation on Wednesday. India's Prime Minister congratulated Putin on his re-election as the President of Russia. The two leaders agreed to make concerted efforts towards further strengthening the special privileged strategic partnership between the two countries in the years to come. The leaders also reviewed progress in various issues of bilateral cooperation, exchanged views on regional and global issues of mutual interest. While discussing Russia-Ukraine conflict, Prime Minister reiterated India's consistent position in favor of dialogue and diplomacy as the way forward. The two leaders agreed to remain in touch. And soon after speaking with Russian President, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi also held a telephonic conversation with Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky. The two leaders discussed ways to further strengthen India-Ukraine partnership in various spheres. Prime Minister Modi called for dialogue and diplomacy for the ongoing conflict. He added that India would continue to do everything within its means to support a peaceful solution. President Zelensky appreciated India's continued humanitarian assistance for the people of Ukraine. The two leaders agreed to remain in touch. In other news, Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar announced his resignation on Wednesday as Ireland's Prime Minister and the leader of the governing Fine Gael party. In a surprise move, Varadkar said he is stepping down for both personal and political reasons. Varadkar stepping down as the head of the three-party coalition does not automatically trigger a general election. And he said he has asked for a new leader to be chosen on April 6th, allowing for the elections of a new Prime Minister after UK Parliament's Easter break. Time for a short break. Coming up next. Indian Air Force conducts emergency landing test on NH-16.
Haiti descends into chaos. Who has brought this Caribbean nation to its knees? Watch Connecting the Dots to get the full picture every Friday at 8 p.m. IST on DD India. How does the world's largest democracy hold the world's biggest election? Watch Connecting the Dots to get the full picture every Friday at 8 p.m. IST on DD India.
Voice of a rising aspirational world. Stories of challenges, struggles and accomplishment. A world battling conflict, hunger and poverty. Embracing growth, development, science and technology. A voice of progress, a voice of unity. Watch Voice of the Global South with me, Akshay Dongre, only on DD India.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. Our top stories. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi speaks with Russian President Vladimir Putin, discusses bilateral ties and regional conflict, also speaks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken reaches Saudi Arabia on his sixth visit to West Asia to push for Gaza ceasefire deal and release of hostages. Unrest in South Sudan continues. New flare-up of local violence kills 15. And we just heard Prime Minister Narendra Modi speaking at the Summit for Democracy in Seoul. To talk about it, joining us is Dr. Rajan Kumar from School of International Studies, JNU. Good evening and welcome, Dr. Kumar. The Prime Minister just showed the manner in which India stands as an example of how democracy delivers, democracy empowers. What were your key takeaways from his message?
Thank you, Shubhendu, for having me here and for very important topic, democracy, not usually discussed in media. There are a few messages which are very important from India's perspective, from what Prime Minister also spoke from that perspective. First, there is a sense globally that there is an expansion of authoritarian countries. The second, that there is a general feeling that democracy is in decline in a number of countries, also in established democracy and also in the emerging democracy. So that's number two. And there are certain reasons which are being considered by experts as the reason why democracy is declining. Number one is the rampant corruption. The second one is the rise of anti-liberal populist parties. Third is the breakdown of the rule of law in many countries, emerging countries included. And also the fourth and the very important from today's this South Korea's Democracy Summit perspective is the rise of China, which has created a new balance of power. And China it started offering a model of development to a number of countries in Asia and Africa, especially the Indo-Pacific region, where they thought that authoritarian countries are doing economically very well, because Chinese economy per capita income GDP that expanded from 1990 to 2007, it expanded roughly 16 times. So that created a wrong example. But now what is happening? There's a sense in the established democracy that that democracy has to be restored. It has to be saved. The freedom of speech internationally, that has to be protected. So because of that, President Biden, when he became the president 2020 onwards, so he started this summit. And what you saw today, when Prime Minister spoke, This was the third chapter. So why this message from India is important? Because India is a model of democracy and development and diversity taken together. So these three, these three Ds are very important, not only for India, but also for the countries of the global South. Because now India is emerging as a model, and India's democracy is delivering. It's not just democracy, chaotic democracy that we used to hear in the past, but also we have democracy with diversity, but also economic development. So that is an important message which would convey a kind of model for large number of countries which would gravitate towards country like South Korea, which is also a democracy, which is the host of this summit, and countries like India, which is providing a model for these countries. So this is very important democracy,
Right.
and the message given by India is extremely important.
And Dr. Kumar, the premise of this summit, that democracy is in the decline in many parts of the world, as you mentioned. At a time like this, nearly 1 billion people are going to be participating in the world's largest democratic elections in a few weeks from now in India. In that context, in the global context, how does the elections in India become all the more important?
Definitely, we have. This is the year of election, the very powerful
Yes.
democracy. Because just a few days back, you had election in Russia, and now in next month, our election process will start in India, the biggest democracy in the world. And then also towards the end of this year, you will have the election, in the United States. So what you see that there are different types of models which are emerging. Russia is clearly an authoritarian state. It's not a democracy. And in democracies, one of the indicators, the powerful indicator, is the chances of possibility of change of the government. You see that despite all the support that the present government in India, they are fighting very hard to remain in power. Campaigning has started, as you know. So India's model, where we have we are not just procedural democracy, we are substantive democracy, where freedom of expression is protected, the rights of minority are protected. We have separation of power. Yes, we have certain issues also, but our democracy is functioning and is delivering. So from that perspective, I think this year is the year of election, and the summit which you saw just in Korea. So that summit is also important because South Korea is trying to send a very powerful message that democracy is not only in the Western countries, but also there are non-Western countries which are which are highly democratic and which are doing well in terms of economy, in terms of promotion of soft power, in terms of cultural expansion, etc. And they can work as a bulwark against the authoritarian expansionism. And I'm referring specifically to China, because China is the most important country in Indo-Pacific, and Chinese model is a problem for a large number of countries, large number of democracies in the neighborhood, be it Japan, be it South Korea, be it India, and other democracies in Southeast Asia. So for that reason, I think democracies should come together, and they have to ideologically as well as in terms of implementation of program, they have to stop the expansion of Chinese influence in the region.
Dr. Kumar, one of the underlining themes of this democracy summit are digital threats to freedom. It's articulated in the form of AI, artificial intelligence, misinformation. One could understand them as fake news. On the other hand, when Prime Minister was speaking about technology, he mentioned the manner in which India has been able to use technology, use innovation as an enabling force in democracy. How do you read the contrast?
I think this is very important. There are two issues, Shubhendu. One that you are talking about the technology and how technology has created, an access to this democratic dividends, be it empowerment of the people, be it distribution of resources, etc. And India has very successfully as far as through the banking, democratization in the process of banking, democratization in the process of access to digital finance, etc. So India has done very, very well as far as this expansion of technology is concerned. But also also other countries where South Korea is also hosting the AI summit this year. And as you said that there is a huge concern that misinformation has become very prevalent in number of countries, and that is leading to some kind of, the authoritarian countries are doing much better in terms of expanding the propaganda and creating misinformation for the people, and not giving the right information about the resources or about the programs, etc. So in that context, I think India has done very well as far as access to digital financing, etc., is concerned, and that is an important model for the countries of the global south. And also in checking corruption, one important message that you asked in the first part of your question, that what is the important message? So apart from accountability, freedom of expression, democracy, etc., human rights, etc., other message which is integrated with this entire democracy summit is the issue of checking corruption. Corruption is an important issue which is being discussed in all three summits on democracy, and they are talking about the accountability, they are talking about transparency in the international financial system, and also checking some of the the way Bitcoin, etc., are operating, the way they are being used by the terrorist organization, etc. So these are important issues and messages being sent through this what you call democracy summit.
And another point, Dr. Kumar, that Prime Minister articulates in his message is what Indian democracy does, not just for itself, for the country, but also for the world. You mentioned the Global South earlier. India's G20 presidency saw the kind of centrality to Global South that India worked towards, whether it's climate justice or reforms at UNSC or more. The priority of the Global Souths have been the priorities of India as well. So in that sense, also using the power of democracy to further the cause, the right cause in the world.
Absolutely. What India is trying to convey to the world, that the international institutions must democratize. It cannot be the way it was, because most of the institutions, be it IMF, World Bank, United Nations Security Council, they are the products of post-World War II situation. And that has changed. Now countries, like India, Brazil, Japan, etc., these countries have become very influential in terms of their global influence, in terms of their economy, in terms of their military, in terms of their disaster management, climate change, etc. So the international institutions must democratize, and India has reiterated this in several forums, including today's forum. That's one part. Second, that we need to bridge the gap of disparity. What has happened in the last 2-3 decades, that per capita income has increased, but the disparity has also increased across the world. And because of that, you see the rise of populist parties, which follow a very hardcore majoritarian kind of policy. So unless until you bridge the gap between the poor and the rich, the right-wing parties will take advantage of that. And we have seen that in the United States. You are seeing the rise of right-wing parties in Hungary, Poland, a number of European countries, France, Sweden, etc. So the message is also that democracy is important, but democracy cannot sustain without delivery. So and kind of empowering the people through financial deliberation, through financial sharing of resources. So that is important message that has to be delivered, and also on the issue of security, crime, etc. So these are the important issues which were discussed in the summit, and these are important. But again, the implementation is very important. Democratic deliberation is important, but what is missing, in my view, that these summits do not have the way to implement the policies on which they take the decision. So I think they're also talking about at least implementing some part of the deliberation, especially related to transparency, accountability, and corruption, and they're expecting some kind of commitment from the countries which are participating.
On that note, Dr. Rajan Kumar, thank you very much for joining us on Newshour, sharing your perspective.
Thank you. Thank you.
Moving on, Israeli military on Wednesday said it killed 90 terrorists at Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital, also arrested 160 terrorists for questioning. Israel said the raid at Gaza's largest medical facility was based on intelligence that it was again being used by terrorists. In northern Gaza, an IDF aircraft struck an operational Hamas tunnel shaft, while in southern Gaza, security forces eliminated 3 terrorists and struck terrorist sites during operations in Khan Yunis. Israeli forces also eliminated 6 terrorists in Jabalia. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Saudi Arabia on Wednesday, marking his 6th visit to the Middle East since the Israel-Hamas conflict. The US top diplomat is scheduled to meet Saudi leaders in Jeddah and Egyptian leaders in Cairo to push for a Gaza ceasefire. Antony Blinken will focus on efforts to deliver more aid into Gaza during talks with the leaders. Talks in a truce brokered by Egypt and Qatar are resuming this week in Qatar. In an address to the Parliament, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has said that a ceasefire in Gaza is looking more realistic now so as to allow more humanitarian aid into the enclave.
Mehr humanitäre Hilfe nach Gaza gelangt.
I don't want to give false hope here, but my impression right now is a little bit that chances are more realistic than they have been for a long time, even if we are far from success. But it would be good for it to happen now, in this situation. I, for my part, encourage everyone to make their contribution to quickly find an agreement.
Jetzt passiert.
Unrest in Sudan continues as unidentified youth in Pibor region shot dead 15 people on Tuesday. According to an official, the region's commissioner was also killed in the latest flare-up in the country. Authorities say the suspect belongs to the region's Anuak community. Since 2018, peace deal routine clashes among patchwork of armed groups have continued to kill and displace large number of civilians in the region. And DD India's Patrick Hoyt reports from South Sudan's capital, Juba.
A county commissioner and his bodyguards were killed when their convoy was ambushed on their return from a village to the local government headquarters. A deputy army commander and his close security officials who were part of the commissioner's team also died. Local authorities say 4 people survived the attack but sustained injuries. South Sudan has a very high prevalence of light weapons and small arms in the hands of people without licenses, according to the United Nations. The government's attempt to disarm civilians has not been successful due to civil war in its neighboring countries, which makes it easy for weapons to come into the country. Local government officials say the attackers are suspected to be armed youth in the area. However, no one has yet been arrested in connection with the killings. South Sudan's government says it has formed a committee to investigate the incident. Patrick Oyet in Juba reporting for DD India.
12 miners were killed and 8 rescued after an explosion in a coal mine in southwestern Pakistan, officials informed on Wednesday. Provincial Disaster Management authorities say that teams recovered 12 bodies, that survivors had been taken to hospital. The province chief inspector of mines said 20 miners had been inside a mine when a methane gas explosion took place overnight. Mine workers have complained that a lack of safety gear and poor working conditions are key causes of frequent accidents. Let's now turn to other stories making news today. Fighter jets and transport aircraft of the Indian Air Force carried out operations on emergency landing facility airstrip on National Highway 16 in Baptala district of Andhra Pradesh. Sukhoi 30 and Hawk fighters carried out overshoots, and a AN-32 and Donia transport aircraft landed and took off from the strip. Payments through digital means in India are hitting new highs. In February, transactions worth $218.7 billion were made through Unified Payments Interface (UPI), with a staggering 122 crore transactions. Indian industrialist Ratan Tata on Wednesday met Chief Minister Hemanta Biswa Sarma of Assam. Assam is a state in northeastern India. The manufacture of semiconductors in Assam will likely put the state on the global map. India's largest food delivery firm, Zomato, on Wednesday ditched plans for green uniforms for a new vegetarian-only service, citing concerns the country's vast vegetarian population might then shun its regular service. The decision was taken less than 24 hours after Zomato CEO Dipinder Goyal announced a green-coloured pure veg fleet different from its normal red to bring orders from vegetarian-only restaurants. And still to come on DD India News Hour. Polish farmers have intensified protests against the European Union. Myanmar's military junta holds an auction for the sale of home of jailed former leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Russia and Belarusian will not take part in opening parade at Paris Olympics 2024.
Haiti descends into chaos. Who has brought this Caribbean nation to its knees? Watch Connecting the Dots to get the full picture every Friday at 8 p.m. IST on DD India. How does the world's largest democracy hold the world's biggest election? Watch Connecting the Dots to get the full picture every Friday at 8 p.m. IST on DD India.
You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. Polish farmers have intensified protests against the European Union over environmental regulations and cheap food imports from Ukraine. On Wednesday, EU reached a provisional deal to extend tariff-free access to Ukrainian food producers' markets until June 2025. The recent agreement would include new limits on grain imports and safeguards for other products. The protesting farmers are not in line with the recent deal, as it includes the last few years as a reference for import limits. Meanwhile, Czech farmers also obstructed crossings into neighboring Germany on Wednesday, joining their counterparts in Poland and elsewhere. Farmers with at least 50 tractors blocked a border close to the village of Strasny, leading to Germany. Myanmar's military junta holds an auction for the sale of the home of jailed former leader Aung San Suu Kyi, who spent 15 years under house arrest. No bidders showed up at the auction of the lakeside house, for which the starting price was set at around $90 million. The property was up for auction at the behest of the Supreme Court after a years-long legal battle between Suu Kyi, who was ousted in a 2021 coup, and her estranged brother Aung San Suu. Nobel laureate Suu Kyi is serving 27 years in detention at an undisclosed location for a multitude of offences. World leaders and pro-democracy activists have repeatedly called for her release. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed a Rising Bharat Summit hosted by a leading media channel in New Delhi this evening. Addressing the gathering, PM said government is taking strict actions against corruption, signifying change that has taken place in the last 10 years as compared to the preceding governments which shielded corruption.
आज सरकार भ्रष्टाचार पर कड़े एक्शन ले रही है। जो एक्शन लिया उसका हिसाब दे रही है और भ्रष्टाचारी झूठ बोल बोलकर खुद बचाव की मुद्रा में है। तब देश पूछता था कि पावरफुल लोगों पर ईडी, सीबीआई जैसी एजेंसियां एक्शन क्यों नहीं लेती, ये सवाल पूछा जाता था। आज पावरफुल और भ्रष्ट लोग पूछ रहे हैं कि एजेंसियां उन पर एक्शन क्यों ले रही है। ये अंतर 10 सालों में आया है। बात वही है, नीयत सही तो काम सही।
You're watching DD India News Hour. Time now for all the action from the world of sports. The Afghanistan Cricket Board expressed its disappointment over Cricket Australia's decision to postpone yet another bilateral series against Afghanistan and reiterated its stance on neutral and politics-free cricket across the globe. Cricket Australia on Tuesday announced the postponement of the series, saying it would continue to engage with Afghanistan Cricket Board in anticipation of improved conditions for women and girls in the country. In a statement, the ACB said ACB advocates for keeping cricket distinct from political influence, considering the game's significance in Afghanistan and its connection to the happiness and joy of the Afghan nation. ACB acknowledges the pressures faced by Cricket Australia from Australian government and emphasises on the importance of addressing such issues through collaborative efforts between the two cricket boards. ACB also urges Australian government not to impose its policies on cricket boards and instead focus on supporting the development of cricket across regions. As per the latest statement released by the International Olympic Committee, Russians and Belarusians will not be able to take part in the parade of athletes at the opening ceremony of the upcoming Paris 2024 Olympics, which is scheduled to take place in the month of July this year. The Russians and Belarusians who will be competing as individual neutral athletes under a specially created flag with an anthem without lyrics produced by IOC will not be part of that parade. Athletes from two countries who qualify for games will be competing as independents without their flags and anthems.
The Paris ceremonies were discussed by the IOC Executive Board, and the following principles were established. AINs will not participate in the parade of delegations teams during the opening ceremony, since they are individual athletes, but an opportunity will be provided to them to experience the event. This is the same scenario that was used for independent Olympic participants at the Olympic Games in Barcelona in 1992 for athletes from the former Yugoslavia. Secondly, a decision regarding the participation of AIN in the closing ceremony in Paris will be taken at a later stage, taking into consideration that not all teams that enter the closing ceremony, but it's more all athletes joining together. Thirdly, during the victory ceremonies, an AIN flag will be flown and the AIN anthem will be played should an AIN athlete win a medal. A flag for AIN has been approved and an anthem has been approved. The anthem has no lyrics and has been produced solely for the purpose of the AIN in Paris. The IOC-EB also agreed the medals won by the AIN would not be displayed on any NOC medal table.
The IOC suspended the Russian Olympic Committee in October for recognizing regional Olympic councils for Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine, Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson and Zaporizhia. Earlier on Tuesday, IOC criticized Russia's plans to host their own Friendship Games later in 2024, saying that it was politicizing sports and violating the Olympics Charter. Meanwhile, a Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Maria Zakharova, said on Wednesday that International Olympic Committee's decision was unjust and unacceptable.
The IOC's decisions are illegitimate, unjust and unacceptable. We are outraged by the unprecedented discriminatory conditions imposed by the International Olympic Committee on the Russian athletes who compete in an individual so-called neutral status, who are essentially forced to renounce any association with their homeland, their citizenship, their history, culture and their people. With such actions, the IOC, which should on the contrary develop world sports, actually splits and politicizes international sports movements, succumbing to a certain group of states and actually acts as a tool of unfair competition.
That's all for this edition of DT India News Hour. Let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X and Instagram. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DT India. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh from all of us here in Delhi. Thanks for watching DT India News Hour. Namaskar.